This is my 2018 Dodge Demon, and a while back it had just a little mishap.
Is this part of the hood?
But after a full restoration, that's patina, not damage, it's fine. Anyway, long story short, I built the world's first manual transmission Dodge Demon, and it made 822 horsepower. But now there's just one more thing we need to take care of.
The paint?
No. 800 horsepower is cool, but 1,000 horsepower, that's objectively more cool. We need more power is basically more or less what I'm getting at here. And if we can do it, we'll join the most prestigious club in motorsports for the 3rd time. As for how we're gonna accomplish this, more fuel, better cooling, nitrous. Oh, and then we're gonna hit the road for an ECU setup that just got released, but we'll talk more about that later. Now for this go around the mods, we're gonna do things a little bit differently. Instead of focusing on one system at a time, we're just gonna go front to back. We're off to a rocket start, obviously.
One bonus of doing things that way is it's gonna let us make a little bit of money right off the jump.
Sort of, at least. Really, this is just justification math at its best. This is our stock intercooler pump. It was responsible for circulating coolant through our supercharger, but our new ice tank, this came with another pump that's gonna mount directly below it somewhere in the back of the car. That means this one, we don't need it anymore. Now, the reason why that's important is because they're like $900 used. That's right. This thing just paid for half our new ice tank setup. And really, it doesn't get much better than paying for new mods by selling your old stock junk. That, however, is the end of anything even remotely resembling financial responsibility in this video. Trust me, you have my word on it. This is the crank pulley I just pulled off the Demon, and this is an identical crank pulley that just happens to be 10% bigger. When we originally put the Demon engine together, I did it with a stock size ATI dampener. I was thinking we don't really need to make a ton of power in this car, as if that's really worked out for any project ever. As per usual, the need for more power got the best of me, so off comes the stock one and on goes the 10% bigger one. This will spin the supercharger, well, 10% faster, meaning more boost. Now, there is one silver lining here. It's that since we already had an ATI dampener, we don't need to press on this hub. It's already on the engine. Same deal with the accessory pulley. They're the same size. The only difference in these two parts is this outer ring, which means all we have to do is a little bit of grinding, stick the outer ring on, and be on our way. Now that we got that out of the way, we can move on to something a little more fun. And what? Like I was saying, what could possibly be more fun than Nitrous? As for what Nitrous setup we're gonna run, it's a Nitrous outlet throttle body plate kit. It's the most simple and probably the most cost-effective way to add Nitrous to the car. There are other options. There's spacer plates to go under the blower and inject Nitrous into each individual cylinder. But on this one, those holes there where the Nitrous is injected, it runs through the blower and then gets dispersed into the cylinders that way. It's also the same exact kit we're running on the new race car with a few minor differences that we'll get into later. The reason why we're running RTV on this and not a gasket is because we ported our supercharger. Because of that, we no longer have enough sealing surface to run a gasket, so RTV it is. Specifically Toyota RTV because it's awesome. Now, if I was gonna run some crazy nitrous setup on this thing, I'd probably do it a little bit differently. But because I don't think we're gonna have to rely that heavily on the nitrous, we'll go with the throttle body kit and save ourselves a few bucks. The next part of the nitrous kit are solenoids. They're gonna mount somewhere roughly more or less around here. This line will go to our plate, this will go to our bottle, this is the purge. Before we do that, gotta take care of something under it. A new set of fuel rails. The stock ones aren't gonna cut it anymore. They're too restrictive at this point. Now that we're upgrading the fuel even more, we gotta go with a big boy set of fuel rails from 4 Innovations. I did say we're gonna be jumping around a lot in this episode, and I think the fuel rails would be a pain to do if we had the nitrous solenoids mounted, so why not knock it out first? You know, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the stock fuel rails, but I think we can all agree that on this particular upgrade, it hits just right in the aesthetic department as well. Another bit of good news here is that we already upgraded our injectors last go around, so we don't have to mess with those. We just slap our new fuel rails down on top of them, attach it here at the front. We can plug in our fuel pressure sensor, and then we can tuck the rest out of the way because we still gotta plumb the nitrous. With our nitrous solenoid connected to the throttle body plate, this is normally where we take this solenoid, mount it somewhere right around there, and connect it to the fuel port on the throttle body plate. That's exactly how we have it set up on the race car. When you add fuel to a nitrous setup like this, you can either plumb it from your existing fuel system, or you can do what they did on this car and add an extra fuel tank and pump. That way it's a little less stress on your existing fuel setup. When you do this, injecting nitrous and fuel, it's called a wet shot. On the Demon though, we're going with a dry shot, meaning we're only injecting nitrous. Our existing fuel system's so capable, and the shot of nitrous we're installing so small, specifically about 100 shot, that we can take all the fuel we need from our existing fuel system, meaning we don't have to install any of this.
One thing we can't skip out on though, our purge line. Wow!
I feel like I'm in Too Fast, Too Furious right now. And yes, I still smile every time I hit it. Now in this car, we're gonna route it behind the engine. That way when we're finished up and we put our wiper cowl back on, we can stick it below a hole in that and shoot it 10 feet up in the air. I should note, it does also purge air out of the nitrous lines and make sure the engine gets nice, clean nitrous, but clearly that's a secondary benefit to the whole showing off in a parking lot thing. This last big line's ultimately gonna be what gets ran to the back of the car and connected to our nitrous bottle, but before we worry about that, we've got just a little more fuel to take care of. You don't look so hot, man. That'll do it for our fuel pressure regulator. And as far as mounting, we use this plastic box up against the firewall that used to house some HVAC stuff, and clearly we no longer have to worry about that. Now all the lines that we have to run to the back of the car drop down right next to the header. It's really, really close, which is why we ran all this heat shrouding on it. We have our 2 feed lines and our 1 very long return.
Which means that after a few pit stops along the way to mount our ethanol content sensor along with our fuel filter, we can move on to a different set of lines.
This is part of the Cords Performance Racing Challenger specific icebox kit, and being that it is vehicle specific, we get some really nice touches like these pre-bent hard lines.
From there, I routed the lines up inside the wheel arch where they'll be protected by the fender liner, connected one to our stock heat exchanger and the other directly to the blower via this aluminum hard line.
The line setup, that's nice, but what really makes this kit is this trunk tank. That's also Challenger specific. We're gonna be able to tuck it right back in the passenger corner of the trunk. This might be the least scientific method I've ever seen of tracing holes to drill.
Professional.
No big deal, we're just about to drill inch big holes in the chassis of the car.
Now we can stick our ice tank in with the outlet sitting down through those holes.
The pump, we're gonna handle all that under the car. The only other thing we have to do in here is install our drain. The reason we need that is when we add ice to this car, eventually it's gonna turn into water. Ultimately it would overflow. We already burned this thing down once. We don't need it to be a flood car as well. So now we can just flip that little switch and it'll drain out the back of the car.
As for our pump, it came with this beautiful mounting bracket that, after the addition of a couple rib nuts, let us mount the pump directly under the ice tank.
One thing I've learned over the years is that it's incredibly hard to run 2 massive lines through pretty much anywhere on a newer car and have them be tucked away. But somehow this kit does the job. Where the pump's mounted, where the outlet on that tank is, they 90 degree right up here. You arch them over the fender liner, and the only part that gets a little tricky is slipping them past the fender liner right here. I did have to cut a good bit of the fender liner off. Normally it runs down there. Now we did test fit this. It does fit, but for now I'm gonna leave it out just until we make sure everything works. The next thing on the agenda isn't gonna make us any more power. It just might let us use that power a little bit longer. I've been told by at least a decently reliable source that the first time we take this car to the track on somewhat sticky tires, we're gonna turn the differential to, and I quote, dust. Now what we're gonna do about that is put a differential brace on it. And instead of buying one for $400 or $500, we're just gonna take one off a wrecked car we have in the shop. Luckily, this is one of the only parts on this car that didn't get broken, which is actually a shame because it's one of only like 300 some manual wide body Hellcats they made in 2018. We actually have another one right up there, but hey, at least part of it gets to live on in the Demon. Of everything we're gonna do in this episode, this should far and away be the easiest. In fact, we don't really have to take anything out except a couple bolts. It's a 3-piece design. The first piece is gonna bolt right to our rear differential cover. Our second piece is going to bolt into these 2 pre-existing holes on the subframe. And we're done with the rear. Now we just have to install this last little brace that goes on the front side. So the passenger side's a little bit tricky. If you don't have these exhaust actuators, you're probably fine. Otherwise, you're going to need a really big pry bar and New Guy Tim, or you can just drop your exhaust, which might be the easier route if you don't have New Guy Tim. Well, that was easy. Now that we spent, I don't know, all 3 minutes protecting our drivetrain, what do you say we get back to trying to actively destroy it? Now it's time to deal with the part of the trunk install that isn't chassis specific. We got to mount our nitrous bottle. Unlike on the new race car where we have twin bottles, we have a nice billet bracket, on this car we're gonna try to run one bottle, at least for the time being. The reason I wanna do that is I'm gonna try to tuck it back in that corner so we have something in our driver corner, we have something in our passenger corner, but the whole main portion of this trunk stays accessible. You know, for when we take it grocery shopping and do all the other stuff we'll probably never do with it. Yeah, she ain't going nowhere. Now we just gotta run the line into the trunk somehow and connect it to that fitting, and we're good on the nitrous front. We have this massive line, but we're kind of lacking on good spots to run it through into the chassis. Everything in the trunk floorboard above the gas tank, it's all tight. I wanna keep it away from heat and I wanna keep it away from moving parts. So I think what we're gonna have to do is go up into the fender liner and run it through the side of the trunk, I think. The best part about this plan is we can use this already existing grommet. There we go, nitrous install complete. Now one thing we are gonna have to do, there's so much excess line here, I had to loop it around the bottle. Now that I know exactly how much we need, I'll have a hydraulic line shop shorten this so it's not just flopping around in the trunk. Now all that fuel work we did last episode where we hardwired our dual fuel pumps, well now we get to rip all this stuff back out because we were running out of fuel in the dyno last time, only making 822 horsepower, so it's definitely not gonna be enough this time. We're hoping to make over 1,000. This setup though, it's got 3 525 liter per hour pumps. It's gonna give us all the fuel. I feel like I'm rigging a boat here for sure. There we go, we're through. That's what we needed. Now, once New Tech Tim feeds me the lines up from the bottom of the car, we can connect our lines. We can tighten our lines if I put the right side of the wrench on it. And with that, we're done with the fuel system, essentially. The one part we haven't messed with though, wiring. Not on the nitrous, not on the ice tank, not on the fuel system. We're gonna tackle all that on our little field trip we're about to take, but I do wanna fill it with fuel and power a pump just to test for leaks. Send it. You can hear the regulator doing its thing. It's not leaking though. Best I can tell at the front, there's no leaks. On the inside, same deal. No leaks. Everything looks suspiciously good. But hey, when things are going well, especially on this car, I'm not gonna question it. So now we get to hit the road and go visit our friends at Big 3 Racing. 6-hour drive for me, 1 minute ad for you. Guys, if you ever wanted to turn your lawn that perfect shade of green, all while saving some green, now you can thanks to the sponsor of today's video, Sunday. To be honest with you guys, as busy as my schedule is, I was always the guy with the worst lawn in the neighborhood. The research, the planning, the yard work, I just couldn't commit the time to it. Thankfully though, Sunday takes all the time consuming guesswork out of it. I just went to getsunday.com, answered a few quick questions about my lawn goals and the size of my property, picked one of the custom lawn plans that was tailored to my yard and my yard alone, and a few short days later, the keys to a healthy lawn were on my doorstep. Now for as easy as ordering the perfect care plan was, getting to work on your lawn was, well, even easier. I genuinely can't imagine an easier or more cost-effective way to get your lawn in tip-top shape. Plus, the products use carefully selected ingredients with no harsh chemicals. They even have a formula specifically for bare spots, of which, well, you see my yard, right? Now guys, when you're ready to tackle your lawn the smart way, make sure you go to getsunday.com/Lee and use code LEE30 for 30% off your first custom lawn plan. This little black box is what we came all this way for. And what this is gonna do is let us install this into this, even though we just removed this. Now Rick, owner of Big 3, correct?
Yes.
Part owner, there we go. You're the person in charge, person responsible for this gym, I suppose. So I'll let you explain. You can do it much better than I can.
So what we actually did is we teamed up the race products, which is Rick Anderson Competition Engineering, to bring the Hellcat Gateway to the market, which is actually the missing link to allow you to plug in a Holley Terminator X or Dominator ECU into all your factory functioning Hellcat, and also will work with Scat Pack or most any other V8 Hemi applications that we're working on right now. This takes Holley's CAN data, it converts it to all the CAN data that Chrysler's looking for, so all your factory modules, buttons, SRT pages, all that stuff still work, but instead of using the lockdown, complicated factory ECU, you're using the more approachable, easy to use Holley ECU.
Lockdown, complicated factory ECU. Yeah, I know a thing or two about that. Now I know what you're thinking. Wouldn't this have solved pretty much every wiring issue we spent the last year trying to deal with on the Demon? Yes, it would have, but it's a brand new product that wasn't available at that time. So for everybody who said, why don't you just put a Holley in it? Why don't you put a standalone in it? I didn't want to lose my stock gauge cluster, all the stock features. Now, don't have to do that.
The Holley ECU not only replaces aftermarket two-step boxes, nitrous controllers, boost controllers, allows us for real-time flex fuel tuning. The only thing that you lose is cruise control.
Now, as far as install goes, super easy. The gateway itself replaces the factory computer, therefore mounts in the factory computer's location. As for our new ECU, the Terminator Max, there's no more room in the engine bay for that, so they made this awesome bracket that tucks it back in the passenger fender well.
Now, just so we're all on the same page here, I've been here for all of 2 hours. The ECU's installed, the gateway's done, and we're ready to test it. It's easily the quickest standalone install I've ever been a part of.
Yay, I think we got it this time. By we, I mean Rick.
Well, it might be missing half the stuff we need to make it run well, but it runs.
That went 10 times easier than I thought it was gonna.
That's all right. We have all the odds and ends and everything else to add on, so that'll take us up the rest of the day.
Yeah, now's the fun stuff, I guess.
Yep.
Odds and ends indeed. This whole round of mods was done on such a tight timeline because of all the other projects we have in the shop that when it came time to leave for Big 3, I still didn't have all the parts I needed. Parts like this belt for our new pulley combo, of which I overnighted 2, and as you would imagine, exactly 0 fit. Luckily the guys here had to use one we could slap on so it didn't screw us up too bad. Then we had to install this map sensor spacer. This gave us a boost reference to run over to our fuel pressure regulator and saved us from having to tap the blower lid.
Now, in the spirit of making the best use of time, while those guys are tidying up some wiring, we're gonna go get our nitrous bottles filled.
On the fuel front here, I think they got it pretty well dialed in. Pumps are getting power from this 4 controller that came with our kit. It's actuated by our new Holley ECU. 3 of these pumps at full bore need a lot of juice, so we powered our 4 module directly off the fuse box. Then coming out of the module, we run these wires up through the trunk and into the rear seat, where ultimately they power each one of our 3 pumps individually. From there, it was all hands on deck, wiring up the nitrous system as well as the intercooler pump, along with doing a little bit of troubleshooting. You know, going through everything, making sure there's no missing O-rings on our ethanol content sensor, and just doing basic demonstrations of why you should use a funnel when you change your oil.
Or if you don't miss. Well, the ECU install, cake, 2 hours max. Wiring up everything else you guys just watched me do to this car, that's what took us all night, but I think we've got it sorted. I sound more confident about that than you look.
So we're gonna just run through the output test here to make sure everything works like we think it's gonna work.
What are we going with first, nitrous?
Let's check to make sure the nitrous solenoid actually clicks. All right, you ready?
Ready.
All right.
Well, that's a click, it's a loud click too.
Click, all right, that means things are gonna party. So now we'll check the second fuel pump.
You guys are gonna have to take my word for this one. Then back here, we've got our ice tank. Yeah, that's clearly working. So 3 for 3, we're all good. And I guess being that it's strapped down on the dyno, that means it's go time?
It's time to make some noise.
We hit 1,000 yet?
No, we've not hit. We're a couple hundred shy right now. It's
Couple
pretty
200 shot.
Yeah, it's pretty heat soaked. I don't have much timing into it still. Just trying to get the fuel curve dialed in, so we'll keep creeping up into it.
All right, so we're down a couple hundred horsepower, but hey, we didn't install an ice box for nothing. So when I ran this drain line for the trunk, I wasn't real particular about where I put it. Where was that coming from? There it is.
There it goes.
That's where we're draining from. We got to do something about that. That was a bit of an oversight. There we go. So it works if we pull the hose out by about this much. We'll have to cut that down a little bit. I think it was pressing up against the bumper. I don't know, it wasn't happy.
We're approaching 900 horsepower, a little lower than I was hoping. I think the gearing might have a little bit something to do with it. We're gonna allow the car to cool down because we've been relentlessly killing it. And we're gonna come back and we're gonna ice it down again and see if we could make that, at least make 900 and see if we can make that 4-digit on spray.
All right, we gave it an hour. She feels cold-ish. It's iced. Do one more pull without nitrous and see what we come up with. Clearly cooling it did some good. Final number without spray, 946 on a Mustang dyno, so it's a little bit lower reading than, say, a Dyno Jet or some of the other brands out there.
A cold engine is a happy engine.
We came way closer than I thought to hitting that 4-digit goal without the nitrous. We're running 100 shot of nitrous, so if my math is correct here, we should hit it no problem. That's what I like to see.
There's your 4-digit, baby. This is so unreal. We brought this thing from the literal scrap heap to make it 1,005 horsepower and 950 pounds of torque.
The demon's finally there, and there is one more thing. I didn't want to go into this before we, made sure everything was cool, make sure it didn't blow up on the dyno or anything like that, but we're gonna hit the track now because why not? This is the first and probably the only time you'll ever hear me say this, but we didn't come here with the thought to make it go fast. We just want to try some things out. Awesome property like this, Dragway 42. Beautiful here, my first time. Now, as far as traction goes, you might have a solution for that.
We are able to get data from the ABS sensor, input into the ECU, and see what our average wheel speed difference is in a form of slip. And then from there, we could do gadgets and doodads and numbers and boopity bops and hopefully try to make it not spin and try and kill you.
In that, traction control is one of the biggest reasons I want to go with this setup from the jump.
All right, we're just getting data this time. We want to make sure the wheel slit stuff works. Let's go figure it out.
Let's have fun.
There is one more feature here that's awesome that I haven't mentioned. It has launch control now. 2-step, baby. Welp. All right, well, apparently we need to go get a drive shaft. Numero uno, didn't make it 1 foot down the track.
To be clear, this is where I started. That's where I got. I don't know if this is a slight against my drive shaft or credit to the track, which the prep is amazing. Good job there. Hopefully I'll be back one day.
We'll be glad to have you back.
One pass. That's all that I asked.
It didn't make it 1 foot.
Exactly.
Not 1 foot. What a week. It was awesome. It was fun. It was really, really long.
That's what you say.
Okay, there we go. I was waiting for it. I thought it myself. Anyway, massive shout out to Big 3. All the guys there were super helpful with this car. They stayed late to get it running right. They supported me at the track. This isn't a sponsorship. It's not an ad. Just an honest review. I can't even be mad that it broke. We set out with the goal of making 1,000 horsepower. We did it. We hit the 4-digit horsepower club for the 3rd time. And in times like this where you're winching a car back on the trailer, that's just going to have to be good enough. And let's be honest. What's more important? Fast track times or a couple pieces of paper taped to a wall? 2-time, soon to be 3-time member of the 4-digit horsepower club, the most prestigious membership club in motorsports.
You choose your own club.
It is my club. I am the sole member, and it's quite prestigious, is it not? It really doesn't go that way.
30 hours later, 100,000 hours later.
Shut the